It is roughly 12 p.m., the 24th of June, 2025. Camera check real quick. Camera looks good. So, let's get into it. Book 2, The Firewalker's Oath. Chapter 1, The Step Beyond Life. The city of Elsewhere awoke to perfect silence, not the reverent hush of memory, nor the contemplative stillness of old Melithea. This silence was curated, imposed, engineered by discipline. At dawn, the 5 bells tolled not in harmony but in sequence, one for each god, none overlapping. Above every threshold, the day's rite was posted. To speak out of rhythm is to delay the pattern's return. Children gathered in the plaza, their hands clasped behind their backs, their shoulders rigid with rehearsed stillness. One by one, they recited the dawn invocation, each word a note, each breath a measure. No laughter, no birds singing, only voice and the emptiness between it. From the high platform at the city center, Anidus watched. He wore white trimmed in black flame, a robe neither priestly nor martial, but something colder, administrative. He did not raise his voice. He had not needed to in months. Very good, he said. Let the gods see our shape. Correctors lined the edges of the square, robed in ash gray, faces concealed beneath smooth iron masks. Etched with the 5-fold sigil, they carried no weapons. Their hands were empty, but when they moved, even the stone seemed to flinch. A small boy faltered in the 3rd line. His syllable hung too long, the beat misaligned. One of the correctors stepped forward, silent as a shadow, a flick of the hand, a twist of the wrist, and the boy was marked with a stripe of cold ash along the cheek. He did not cry. His mother did not protest. Anidus nodded. Correction is not cruelty, he said. It is rhythm enforced. Then, just for a breath, Anidus frowned. The boy reminded him of someone. A face, blurred by time. Someone who had once sung to Melithea in joy, not fear. But the pattern demanded symmetry, not sentiment. The memory passed. The people had begun to repeat his words in private, and then in public, until they passed from repetition into belief. Correction is not cruelty. Correction is not cruelty, they said. As the sun crested the eastern spire, Anidus turned to descend the platform. One of the younger priests approached him hesitantly, scrolls in hand, sweat streaking his brow. Lord Anidus, there have been rumors in the northern quarter, old chants, echoes of the tree's path. They're not sanctioned. Anidus did not look at him. Echoes are not alignment, he said. They are memory unmeasured. But should we do nothing? Anidus whispered, eyes narrowing. They will sing themselves silent. The priest bowed and retreated. From the edge of the plaza, a girl knelt beside a drainage grove and began to draw something in the dust with her finger. A corrector approached, stopped, and stared. She was writing in spirals, 3-armed, coiled inward, like a song folding into itself. The corrector raised his hand, paused, then lowered it. The girl looked up. Their eyes met through the slotted mask. Neither spoke. The city moved on around them, in steps and syllables, while far above, the wind passed through the god spires and did not echo once. Anidus had stopped dreaming 3 nights ago. Sleep came, but brought no images, only light. Not warm light, but pure alignment. Blinding, harmonic, total. He would wake with blood on his pillow from where his nose had bled, unaware. His servants did not speak of it. They had begun to dream the same. In the mandate chamber, 5 braziers burned before 5 gates, each marked with the sigil of a god. Anidas stood in their center. His voice had begun to echo, not into the chamber, but back into himself. He would speak a sentence and hear the end of it before it left his mouth. "It is time," he said. The chamber replied, "It is time." He was no longer certain which voice had spoken first. He blinked hard, suddenly unsure whether he had spoken aloud at all. The priests watched him now with reverence and fear. They wrote down his words, not as commands, but as scripture. One recorded a phrase Anidas had no memory of even saying. To resist the chorus is to fracture the soul. He had written it in flame script, blinking back tears as he did. Outside in the streets, correctors had begun to appear unbidden. No orders, no scrolls. They emerged from shadowed places, basements, alleys, even wells. When questioned, they gave no name, but all moved as if receiving the same instruction, silent and absolute. Anidas held council that evening in the hall of alignment. 14 chairs stood empty. Those who had remained sat straight back and mute, eyes wide and unfocused. One of them, the high archivist, spoke with inflection. "Your will has multiplied, my lord. We no longer wait for words. We move when the silence stirs." Anidas nodded slowly. "It is not my will, it is theirs, and they have made it ours." At that, the braziers flared, 5 colors spiraling upward, then folding into a singular, writhing white. No one looked away, no one blinked. Anidas stepped forward toward the flame, and for the first time his shadow moved the other direction. The rite took place beneath the eastern spire, where the light pooled longest at dawn. It was called the Morning Harmonization, a daily act of public memory, in which 5 volunteers sang the pattern's names in succession, each one invoking a god in the correct order, tempo, and pitch. Today, one voice wavered. She was a weaver's daughter, 12, maybe 13. She wore her mother's ribbon in her hair. She gripped it when she sang. Her voice broke on the 3rd note of Aaron's call. Not shattered, just uncertain. The crowd inhaled as one. Silence followed. Then came the echo. A corrector stepped forward from the margin of the circle. No signal, no command. He placed one hand on the girl's forehead and the other on his own chest. He did not speak. The sigils on his mask flared once in red gold fire, then dimmed. The girl collapsed. No mark, no scream, just a fall, light as breath. Her father rushed forward. He was seized before he could cross the circle. 3 more correctors emerged from behind the crowd, moving with mechanical certainty. One extended a scroll to the man's face. He wept as he read it. The scroll bore only 5 glyphs, the gods' names written in descending spiral. Below them, in blood ink, deviation is delay. Delay is dissonance. Dissonance must be consumed. The girl was not returned to him. She was carried away beneath a white cloth. Her name was not spoken again that day. Anidas heard of it passing over a midday report on street alignment metrics. He did not flinch. "Correct," he said. "Too many have confused mercy with imprecision." Later, alone in the mandate chamber, he stared at the 5 flames. They whispered now, not with words, but with breath and pull, as if gravity were made of want. He whispered back, "Not yet, but soon." It began with chalk. On the 3rd day after the harmonization rite, someone drew a spiral on the door of the Temple of Iron, just behind the altar where names were recited in monotone. No one saw it happen, no one claimed it, but by the time the first flame was lit for the day's rites, it was there, white, narrow, almost delicate. The correctors scrubbed it away before the hourglass turned. That night, it reappeared, larger. 3 more were drawn the following day. One in a gutter, one on the underside of a bench near the Mandate Plaza, and one etched in heat char along the wall of the Counselor's Gate. No 2 matched perfectly, but all curved inward, and all were traced by hand. It was not protest. It was memory resurfacing. And memory, unlike rebellion, doesn't ask for permission. In the northern quarter, a group of children began humming a tune that could not be played soft uneven, but oddly familiar. When questioned, they could not name where they had heard it. A teacher tried to silence them. A corrector arrived and placed a hand on the wall. The humming stopped. The next morning, the wall cracked. Priimydica had not spoken in 6 days. He walked the outer edge of the city in silence, tracing the forgotten spiral paths with his steps, where others saw street corners and geometric grids. He still saw memory, bent like breath, lines meant to lead inward. He passed a child riding an ash. He passed a man muttering to himself in fractured Malathea. He said nothing. He did not need to. By the 6th night, a new spiral had been carved into the stone beside the eastern spire, this time not in chalk, but in fire, a flame that burned cold, colorless, and refused to go out. A corrector stood before it, unmoving. His mask began to flake. It was not planned. No decree was issued, no horn blown, no banners raised. Yet, on the 7th morning, as the light broke through the eastern colonnade and caught the ash still smoldering on the plaza stones, the people of Priimydica gathered. They came without ritual, without command. They arrived in silence, barefoot, faces unpainted, hands empty. Many bore nothing but the old rhythm on their lips, a slow, syncopated breath, like the memory of a chant long forgotten but never severed. The correctors stood ready, their masks gleamed, but none moved. They had not received instruction in 2 days. Some had begun to twitch in their stillness. One had collapsed entirely, his fingers curled inward as if gripping a song he could not release. A woman stepped forward. No one knew her name. She was not a priestess. She did not speak. She simply knelt at the center of the plaza and placed her forehead to the stone. Then another, then a child, then dozens, not in protest, in return. The spiral was drawn again, this time not in chalk, not in fire, but by bodies. The old alignment of the city, forgotten by architects but preserved in breath, was reformed in flesh. People stood in curves, concentric and alive. Then came the sound, not a voice, a presence. Priimydica stepped into the plaza. He did not raise his arms, he did not carry a flame, but the wind moved around him with shape. The spirals tightened, the silence bent towards stillness. A corrector approached him, the tallest. Mask blackened, joints stiff. He raised a hand as if to speak, but the voice that came out was not his. It was a layer, echo of 5 overlapping tones, glitching and disharmonic. Priimydica touched the ground. The sound stopped. The corrector fell, mask cracking in 3 lines, smoke hissing from the seams. No one cheered, no one fled. They only knelt. All at once, Priimydica said nothing, but the pattern aligned. The mandate platform stood untouched. Its banners were gone, torn by the wind or taken down in the night. The 5 flame braziers remained unlit. The white stone floor was stained with ash where the correctors had once stood in line. Now, only figure remained. Only one figure remained, that is. Anitas. He had not spoken since the spiral formed in the plaza. He had watched it from above, unmoving as the people knelt, as Priimydica entered, as the correctors fell like empty husks. He did not rage, he did not call out, he only watched. They had left him alone, not out of mercy, but because no one knew what he had become. He stood barefoot, robe torn. The 5 around him had gone cold. At dusk, he stepped into the center of the platform. I was the voice, he said. No one answered. I was the order that remembered what you forgot. I bore their names when you let them fade. I aligned the world. Still, the people were silent. Even Priimydica didn't speak. Anitas raised his hands to the sky. They do not need your worship. They need a vessel. They need to see one who will burn with perfect will. He knelt just once. Then he placed both hands on the stone and whispered the 5 names in their proper order one last time. The flame braziers ignited at once, blue, red, gold, black, and white. Then they twisted inward, folding into a single column of colorless fire. Anitas stepped into it. He didn't scream, he didn't fall. He stood, arms outstretched, until his body was no longer visible, only shadow inside flame. Then even the shadow disappeared. The column collapsed into a single point of light and vanished. The mandate was gone. What remained was only stone, warm to the touch, etched with 5 words in the old script. No one carved them. They read, he burned. The pattern did not. And at last the wind returned to the plaza. By morning, the plaza was no longer ash. Men and women swept the stone clean, not as right, but as instinct. The braziers were gone, the platform cold, Children traced their fingers along the spiral etched by bodies the night before. Now faintly visible as a shimmer in the ground, no one spoke of the mandate. No one needed to. The city did not erupt in joy. There were no proclamations, no bells. The silence lingered, but it had changed. Where it once rang hollow, it now rang true. The priests of memory returned from hiding. Their robes were tattered, their chants uncertain, but their voices held. Some of them stood at the plaza's edge, weeping, not from sorrow, but from recognition. That day, Priimydica walked the inner circle of the plaza alone. He held nothing, wore no crown, accepted no throne. At the center, where Anitas had burned, the stone still glowed, faintly warm. Priimydica touched it once with his palm and knelt beside it. A breeze moved through the city, not as a gust, but as a breath. The people watched. Some knelt, others bowed their heads, but none reached for him. There was no acclamation, no coronation, only a man kneeling in memory on behalf of a city that now remembered what it had almost become. The spiral, once fractured, now held, not as command, as choice. And across Priimydica the bells did not ring, but from the highest spire 5 birds took flight. The memory held for now. That night, Priimydica did not return to the plaza. He walked alone beyond the city's last circle, down the old path of roots and memory. The stars were low, heavy with silence. No one followed, no one watched. It was only secrecy, only necessity. The spiraling heights of Priimydica had been restored, but restoration was defiance. The gods had seen, they had not spoken, but their silence was not surrender. It was judgment withheld. They had tasted worship again, and they would not forget the taste. What had once been ritual had become hunger, and hunger always returns. Priimydica knew what the people did not yet say aloud. The gods would come back, not in blessing and fire. There could be no spiraling city if the heavens cracked again. No memory if the realms fell. Either the gods would die, or Priimydica would. He descended into the chamber beneath the temple of stone, a place no one had walked since before the first fracture. The altar of the root waited, ringed in dust, untouched by fire or doctrine. It did not glow, it breathed. Priimydica knelt and placed 5 stones upon it. Each bore a mark, not names, symbols. One for Isphide, one for Pallas, one for Errol, one for Orphide, one for Ananis. Then he spoke. Let 5 rise from silence, one for each realm the gods have fractured. Let them walk where memory cannot follow. Let them become what the gods fear. He did not name them. Their names would come later, written in the fire and blood of the divine war to come. But their paths began here, at the edge of silence. The stones didn't answer, but they warmed. Outside, the stars shifted. The wind fell still. Across the cosmos, the gods began to stir. End of chapter 1. Chapter 2, in Book 2 of the Firewalker's Oath. The sky over Priimydica was still, not the stillness of peace nor the silence of death, but the breath held before a vow was spoken. Beneath the stone tree, Priimydica knelt. He wore no crown. The spiral was drawn in ash and fire around him. 5 arms curling inward, 5 flames flickering at their end. He had lit none of them. They had appeared when he spoke no words, when he had listened instead. The stone below him pulsed faintly like a second heart. He placed his palm against it, not as a king, but as a witness. If they are ready, he said, let them be named. The flames flared. Elsewhere across the spiraling city and beyond its outer ring, 5 lives halted. A fisherman's daughter dropped her net and stared east, her eyes glowing with ember light. The sea did not move behind her. Even the wind paused to listen. A war veteran in the northern pass, awoke from sleep, his hand on his blade, whispering a name he had never heard. Around him, the snows melted in a perfect circle. A blind scribe in the Hall of Remembering turned his head, as if seeing, began to hum a song no one knew. The ink at his fingertips spiraled outward on the page. The stonecutter laid down his hammer and pressed his forehead to the earth. When he rose, the mark on his brow glowed like an ember. And in the temple of silence, a child with no parent stood, his voice caught in his throat, his shadow stretching in 5 directions. A priest saw him and wept, not knowing why. They each fell to their knees, not from pain, not from fear, but because the pattern had remembered them. At the base of the stone tree, the 5 flames twisted upward into spirals. One burned white-blue, another iron-red, a third hummed with no color at all, the fourth folded inward like a whirlpool of death. The last was pure absence, flame that consumed light without casting it. Priimydica stood. He did not summon them, he did not shout, he simply spoke. Guardians. The word did not echo, it remained suspended in the air like an oath sealed in silence. You are not chosen to reign, you are chosen to end what is forgotten how to end. From the tree's highest branch, 5 birds took flight, each veering toward a different corner of the world. Their wings bore no color, but shimmered like memory. Beneath, the spiral dimmed but did not vanish. The flames thinned, bending like reeds in a breathless wind. Priimydica closed his eyes, and the war began with no trumpet, no sword drawn, no battle cry, only the naming of 5 who would fracture the sky. The summons did not ride on wind or voice. It moved like breath through memory, vibrating only in those who still carried its rhythm. No horns were blown, no decrees were written, but across the spiral lens, the chosen stirred. A man who had once judged 100 cases without appeal stood from a stone bench and wept beside his own verdict, scrawled in dust. A woman who had carried flame across 5 cities during the exile years found her torch relit by no visible hand. A boy exiled for crimes he never committed awoke beneath a tree, his skin warm, though no sun touched him, his shadow bent east. They came in slow streams, drawn to the 5 outer rings where the spiral fires burn. No one directed them, no one received them. They simply arrived, one by one, like notes returning to a forgotten chord. Each guardian had their place, but only one host. An army, formed fully before the others had even begun to gather shape. Isfide's host. They did not wear uniforms, they didn't chant, they came bearing scars and laws. Some carried forged chains, others scrolls sealed with wax and fire. Many brought nothing but silence. What they shared was not discipline, it was having been judged and lived. The guardian of Isfide stood before them, unnamed but unmistakable. Fire rippled at the edges of his breath. He wore no sigil, only ash. When he raised his hand, the spiral fire behind him bowed low, as if answering. Not a word was spoken, but every soldier knelt, some in rage, some in absolution, all in understanding. One among them bore a tattoo written in a language no longer spoken. Another had iron embedded in his back from a sentence never fulfilled. A woman brought her own name, burned into bark, worn around her neck. A child came carrying a book with every page torn out. They formed around their guardian as flame forms around breath. In the other quadrants, the gatherings were slower. The host of stone required stillness. They arrived walking in silence, each carrying a piece of foundation from their home. The host of wind sang before it formed, some in harmony, some in dissonance. The host of water arrived drenched and unbroken, barefoot from the rivers they crossed. The host of the void made no entrance, but those near its spiral found themselves fewer by morning, yet felt no absence. Still, only Isfide's host marched by nightfall. No calm, not in calm, but spiral. Their center, the guardian, barefoot and unblinking. Their path turned toward flame, toward law incarnate, toward the realm where fire speaks and judgment walks with feet of ash. When they reached the threshold at dusk, there was no gate, no wall, no border stone, only a thing of the wind, and a scent of iron in the breath. One by one, the soldiers of the host passed from the realm of men into the realm of fire, and none could say when the crossing occurred. The earth beneath them blackened but did not burn. The sky lost its stars. Isfide did not welcome them, it watched. The mountains here did not rise, they judged. Tall spires of obsidian and slag loomed on either side of the marching host, some etched with runes that glowed faintly red, others cracked and hollow, as if once screaming. No flame burned openly. Instead, the air shimmered with heat that remembered light but refused to offer it. The guardian walked at the center. His robe darkened to soot, his breath was steady, his eyes unflickering. Where he stepped, the fire beneath the stone blinked. The host moved in a spiral pattern, as they had been taught, not for battle, for remembrance. But Isfide did not forget. It had never forgotten. A voice began to speak, not from above, not from below, but from within. It named each soldier's sentence. Thief, arsonist, oathbreaker, false judge. The words did not echo, they embedded. Some faltered, others screamed, one tore at their robes and collapsed. The fire didn't touch them, it simply recorded. Others wept, not in sorrow, but in recognition. A few raised their heads higher, as if daring the realm to name more. One man shouted, "Yes, I was." And the ground beneath him cracked, but didn't break. The march slowed. Every step was an answer. Then came the field of pillars. Columns of black stone. Hundreds of them rose into a ceilingless void. Between them, trails of ash drifted in spirals. Each pillar bore a single word carved deep into its base. Crime, right, loss, name, law, bind, void. Some soldiers reached out as they passed, touching the stone. A few recoiled as if stung. Others lingered, reading every word like a verdict handed down in childhood. At the center, a circle of red glass, the trialing ground. The guardian halted. The host followed. A single pillar flared within a fire. Its word read, "Witness." A voice spoke. This time it had weight. "You who were named guardian, enter alone." The guardian didn't look back. He stepped forward into the circle. His shadow split in 5 directions, and the fire began to bend. Not in anger, in recognition. The circle of red glass was warm beneath the guardian's feet. No fire burned. None was needed. The heat came from below, from somewhere beneath substance, beneath law. The host stood silent beyond the pillars, watching from the edges of memory. But they couldn't follow. This place was not made for many. A second flame bloomed to life above the pillar marked "Witness." It pulsed like a heartbeat, casting no shadow. Then the other pillars began to stir. One by one, each stone lit from within, their etched words glowing with internal ember light. Crime, loss, bind, name, law, void. Each word spoke, but not with voice, with history, with sentence. The guardian stood. From the red glass, a column of smoke, not gray, not black, but iron red. It formed the outline of a figure, genderless, voiceless. Its face mirrored his, but aged and worn, as if shaped by decisions not yet made. The figure raised its arm, not in greeting, in indictment. "You enter as guardian, but who named you?" The words were fire. They rained not in the air, but in the marrow. "The pattern," he said, and before that, silence. Silence does not confer authority. No, but it remembers what law forgets. A tremor passed beneath the glass. The figure's eyes lit with vertical flame. "Then speak it. What does law forget?" The guardian stepped forward with each pace. The glass shimmered beneath his feet. Forgets the child before the crime, the wound before the oath, the name before the verdict. And who remembers these? "We do," he said. "Those who walk the spiral, those who carry memory not as weight, but as fire waiting to return." The figure paused. A flicker of uncertainty passed through its form, as if its outline were being redrawn. From the other pillars, voices began to rise, whispered, layered, indistinct verdicts and pleas, sentences and screams. 1,000 overlapping judgments chanted not in opposition, but in accumulation. He did not cover his ears. He knelt and placed his hand to the glass. Let fire remember, let judgment kneel. The glass cracked, not shattered, not destroyed, but split from center to edge. The figure flickered. Its flames inverted, spiraling inward. Then it collapsed, not with violence, but with submission. The voices stopped. All the pillars dimmed, all but one. The one marked law burned brighter and then bent, not like a branch, like a knee. The fire didn't roar, it surrounded. Each soldier in the host blinked once and found themselves alone. A ring of flame had risen around them, silent and high. The air thickened, the sky vanished. Their ears filled with nothing but breath, and then Her voice is Grine. She did not clone herself. She did not fragment. She issued judgment in parallel, fully formed. Each soldier faced a version of her tailored to their sentence, taller, colder, shaped in flame and iron. Some saw her as mother, some as flame, all as final. And in the center, where the circle was widest, she came in her truest shape. The guardian stood alone in his area. The boundary flared higher. The host could no longer see him. But they felt the heat shift, as though the spine of the realm had turned to face its core. She appeared without steps, first a voice, then a brightness, then form. Isgrind stood 3 times his height, cloaked in molten judgment. Her face was fire, her limbs flickered between shape and sword. Her voice was not one sound, but a chorus of every sentence ever passed. You stand at the center. He did not answer. Break you, she said, and the rest will follow. The guardian raised his shield. She raised her arm. The fire began. Not a blast, a torrent, a continuous beam of flame, white at the center, edged in gold, shrieking with sound. The guardian stepped forward once, set his feet and braced. The shield met the fire. The host could not see him, but in every ring, every soldier felt it. Their own flames dinned. There is Grine. Avatars faltered. Some screamed, some knelt. None could move. He stood. The fire didn't stop, but it bent, then it shuddered. He stepped through it. The heat pulled away from his body like a tide recoiling. Isgrind took a step back. The guardian said nothing. He raised his hand. She reached to strike again, but her flame curled inward. Her limbs began to unravel, not from damage, but from defeat. She looked at him through eyes of light. Irenaeus, she said. Then she broke. Not exploded, folded. Her form collapsed into spirals of fire, which funneled into his chest, one breath at a time. The flame ring vanished. The host reappeared. And the guardian, now named Irenaeus, stood in the center. The fire was his now, and judgment knelt before him. Far from the fire, beneath the stone tree, the wind reversed. Priimydica looked upward, not to the sky, which had already begun to fracture, but to the branches. They trembled, not with storm, but with consequence. One leaf fell. Then another, and then 5, spiraling downward in perfect silence. He placed his hand on the bark. First judgment has fallen, he whispered. The spiral, that part of the pattern which appealed to the Priimydians, responded. A dull hum echoed through the tree's roots, into the stones beneath, into the bones of the city. Priimydica shuddered not with violence, but with memory, walking. Across the spiraling walls, bells rang without hands. Rivers reversed course for a breath, and stilled. In the libraries of the Hollow Order, a more isolated and secretive sect of the priests of memory, ink uncoiled across pages, slithering into unreadable forms. The spiral glyphs, etched into the foundation stones, pulsed once, then dimmed to nothing. High in the citadel of the West Gate, a blind sentry turned his head toward the east and began to weep. No one asked why. And deep beneath the temple of stone, where no root should reach, the earth exhaled heat. Then silence, then heat again. In Isfi, where fire had judged, silence reigned. The host stood together again, but they were not unchanged. The rings of flame that had enclosed them were gone, but a ring remained in each of their memories, perfect, unbroken, and burning. Some wept, others could not look at the guardians, others could not look at the guardian. Irenaeus, now standing in the place where God had broken. One soldier bowed, then another, then all. He didn't speak. The shield was still raised. The fire curled around his spine like a serpent made of breath. It didn't flicker. It waited, and behind his eyes something watched. A spark fell from his shoulder. It didn't fade. It drifted upward, curved once, and vanished into the sky. The host knelt. Far above the pillars of Isfi, the sky cracked, not with thunder, but with a sound like glass parting from itself. 5 stars vanished. The spiral had begun to tear. The pattern would not hold. The remaining gods, they could feel it. The war, no longer declared, but incarnate, moved forward. It didn't ask permission, it remembered, and it burned. End of chapter 2. Chapter 3, Palace, where memory drowns, in Book 2, The Firewalker's Oath. The second flame had no color. It lit without spark, without heat. Where it burned, the air turned to mist. Where it touched stone, water wept from it. The spiral didn't roar, it sighed. Priimydica stood again at the base of the stone tree. The wind didn't return. The first leaf had fallen. Now a second spiraled slowly downward, wet with dew that had not come from rain. He placed the second stone on the altar. Palace, he said. A low tone answered, not sound, but pressure, a morning bell beneath the world. Far from the tree, in the marshland edges where memory tangled with root and rot, a man awoke from a dream in which his mother had sung him a song she never knew. He sat up, he wept, and when he stood, the spiral burned beneath his feet, soft and pale as drowned light. He did not know his name, but he remembered the grief. Across Priimydica, others heard it. A widow set a bowl of water on her hearth, watched it ripple. A child forgot the name of her sister and began to hum a tune that made her father collapse. A mourner, whose wife had never died, fell to his knees and screamed a name not his own. In the caves, near the city, moss grew into spiral forms. An entire choir forgot its words but kept its rhythm. In a forgotten town by the river's bend, a whole street flooded without rain. The waters whispered. From these sorrows, the host began to form. They didn't march, they drifted, weeping, whispering, reaching. Some had names, some had none. Some held portraits they couldn't explain. Others wore wreaths of drowned flowers. They carried lanterns filled with mist. They followed a feeling, not a path. They gathered where the fog touched stone. The guardian stood at their center. No trumpet called him, no title claimed him. He walked with bare feet and eyes that could not hold one direction. He didn't speak, but the fog thickened in his presence, and from the air the second spiral shaped itself, wet, silent, complete. Birds did not cry, insects did not stir. The marsh beneath and then held its breath. The marsh breathed and then held its breath. Priimydica felt it from afar. He closed his eyes and placed a hand over the second flame. It didn't burn, it mourned. They walked without signal. No horn sounded. No standard flew. The host of Palace crossed into their god's realm, not with defiance, but with absence. Each step into the swamp felt like stepping out of a dream. The land changed without announcement. Stone gave way to peat, then to water, then to something in between. The trees grew sideways, some upside down. Roots hung like lanterns. Moss moved. Fog curled up from nowhere and clung to the face like breath that had learned to weep. Nothing burned, nothing echoed. There were no stars. The host began to lose shape. The soldier looked to his right and didn't recognize the woman who had marched beside him since the spiral hit. Another reached to check his satchel and found only damp leaves. One man began humming and couldn't stop. The tune was familiar, but the moment he tried to recall it, the sound changed. The water mirrored nothing. It swallowed reflection, even the lanterns the host carried, mist-filled, faint, grew dimmer the farther they walked. Some flickered out entirely, though no hand extinguished them. The guardian led them. He walked slowly, barefoot. His robes were soaked to the knee. His eyes did not scan, they simply opened, blinked, opened again. He passed through mist without parting it. When they passed beneath the first hanging root arch, several soldiers stopped. They had forgotten what they were walking toward. "Where are we going?" one asked. The guardian didn't answer. Another said, "I remember a name, but it isn't mine." The mud pulled at their steps. No force, no violence, just the gentle insistence of drowning. Some looked back and saw not the path but unfamiliar trees. Some called out, but the fog gave no echo. Some walked faster, afraid they had never started. One by one the host pressed forward, but fewer every mile. Some sat down and spoke to the water. Some wept into it. Some lay down and vanished without a ripple. Those who remained remembered less but walked straighter. The guardian never turned. At last, he stepped onto a small clearing of peat surrounded by water, still, silent, black as ink. The fog didn't touch it. The vines above parted without sound. Here, the land waited, and somewhere beneath the stillness, something remembered him. Paladin had not yet spoken, but her realm had already begun to erase. He didn't kneel. There was no ground. The peat island barely held his weight. The guardian, with each step, sent ripples across its surface, though he walked gently. Fog curled at the edges but didn't enter. It circled, uncertain. He looked down. There was no reflection in the black water, not even a shimmer, only depth. The silence pressed against his ears, not with malice but with weight, like forgotten sleep. Then a shape began to rise. It was not a person, not a god, not yet. The water lifted. It didn't splash. It folded upward, coalescing into a body not made of bone, but a memory wrapped in liquid form. Long hair floated as if in still tide. Eyes open but saw inward. Mouth closed, but the air shifted. Paladin had no crown. She wore no light. She wore sorrow. Her presence was not commanding, but gravitational. The air leaned toward her. Even the vines overhead dipped ever so slightly, as if recognizing grief made flesh. Her voice did not come from her mouth. It came from the water underneath, the water beneath them, the fog above, the ache within. You do not belong here. Then the guardian said nothing. She stepped forward. The water beneath her didn't ripple. You do not come for victory. You come carrying wounds you no longer remember. Still, he didn't answer. Paladin tilted her head. The air stilled. Even the vines above listened. I can return what you lost, she said. Your name, your mother's voice, the first sorrow you buried. He blinked. The fog swirled around her voice like incense. You do not have to fight me. Only listen, only mourn. The water beside her lifted again. In its surface he saw fragments, a home with no roof, a lullaby sung by lips that never formed, a memory, not his, but one he almost believed. The guardian stepped forward once, then stopped. This is not truth, he said. Paladin's face did not change. Truth? What does that mean to a man without memory? He looked at her. He looked at the water. He closed his eyes. He breathed once, slow, sharp, shuddering. It means I know what I grieve. The fog thickened. The water darkened. The island beneath him flexed, then steadied. Paladin exhaled, and her breath was cold. Then you are more dangerous than you seem. She raised her hand, and the vines began to move. The vines didn't strike like whips. They crept. From the trees above, from the water below, from the very roots that once held the island together. Mossy, dark, and slow as sorrow, they reached not to crush, but to cradle. One looped around the guardian's ankle. Another slid gently up his arm. They didn't bind, they remembered. The pressure was tender, like the embrace of something ancient and tried, like arms that had once held the child who never returned. Around the clearing, the host knelt, or what remained of them. Some swayed as if lulled by lullabies no one sang. Some wept without sound. One rocked back and forth, clutching a name that had lost its shape. A soldier whispered, "Mother," through his lips, though his lips didn't move. Another reached for a necklace that had never existed. Paladin spoke, but her mouth did not move. Let go of the spiral. Let it drift as all things must. The vines thickened. One brushed the guardian's lips. Another touched the base of his spine. A third coiled around his ribs like a gentle memory. He staggered once, eyes glazed. The song began, not from his lips but from hers. A low hum, long and deep. It echoed across the water. The fog moved in rhythm. The host began to echo it. A soldier's mouth opened in perfect mimicry. A woman raised her arms and began to sway. It was not a war song, it was grief, sung with precision. The guardian blinked. He tried to remember the spiral, the fire, the name he had not yet earned. He could not. The vines pulled gently downward. The water climbed. His knees gave. His feet submerged. The clearing dimmed. The song deepened. Then faintly, softly from his throat, a note. Not her song. A different pitch. High, cracked spiral. He began the spiral hum. Not loud, not beautiful, but real. The vines recoiled, the water trembled, Paladin's voice caught, just for a moment. And in that moment, the host paused. Faces turned, eyes cleared, one by one, the false song faltered. The guardian didn't shout, he did not proclaim, he sang the spiral again and again. The fog stopped breathing, the water stilled. Paladin opened her eyes wide. She had not known the spiral could sing back. He took a breath, sang again. The memory returned, not all of it, not perfectly, just enough. The vines froze, the song broke. Paladin began to unravel. She didn't scream. Paladin didn't thrash. Her unraveling came in silence. The water that had formed her limbs began to lose cohesion. Her fingers became myth. Her mouth remained closed. The fog no longer obeyed her. It backed away, uncertain. The guardian stood waist deep in the water. The spiral still hummed on his breath. The vines had stilled, not severed, not scorched, just forgotten. They loosened, as if uncertain why they had even risen at all. The water shimmered around him. Beneath the surface, long-buried roots slumped, losing tension. The peat trembled. Bubbles surfaced, not with urgency, but like final confessions long held beneath breath. Paladin took one step back. The movement rippled through her like a sigh through smoke. Her form quivered, one of her eyes dimmed. A braid of memory slipped from her shoulder and spooled into mist. The host stood still. Many had sunk to their knees. Some clutched their own chests as if to keep their hearts from floating away. Others hummed with him now, softly. Not with certainty, but with memory, returning like a name, whispered in the dark. You remember, she said. The words were dry, spoken aloud for the first time. Her voice cracked at the edges like something forgotten trying to shape form again. I do, he said. A tremor passed through the water, not violent, rhythmic, as if the earth below were remembering breath. Paladin raised her hand one final time, not to strike, but to reach. Her face flickered, not into anger, but into sorrow. I only wanted you to rest, she said. I know, he answered, but grief must pass through, not cover. She lowered her hand. The guardian stepped forward. The water parted, not for him, because it no longer knew how to hold shape. His footsteps made no sound. Mist lifted from the pool as he crossed. He reached her, placed one hand on her shoulder. She looked up. Her form swayed, then softened. The water that was her began to fall upward, a slow unraveling, uncurling into the air. She did not shatter. She rose into mist, into memory, into release. As her form thinned to fog, a single word hung in the air, not shouted, not whispered, just spoken. Halicus. The guardian, now named Halicus, closed his eyes. The name entered him like warmth, like weight made sacred. Paladin was gone. The swamp breathed out. The host stood. Their lanterns flickered. Some held hands, others bowed. One began to hum. Halicus stepped out of the water, and the spiral formed behind him, luminous, wet, whole. Far from palace, beneath the stone tree, the roots shivered. Priathir opened his eyes. A mist had formed around the altar. The second flame was gone. In its place, dew, wet, gleaming, sorrowful. He touched it and whispered, Halicus. The bark beneath his hand pulsed once, faint like an old heart, remembering how to beat. Across Priimydica, memory stirred. A scribe in the hollow order dropped his quill and wept, not from sadness, but because a forgotten line of poetry had returned in full. He read it aloud, and the page glowed faintly before fading into blankness. Fulfilled. Near, upon a child looked at her reflection and said a name no one had taught her. Her mother dropped the bowl she was holding and covered her mouth. The spiral glyphs in the east glowed once, then vanished entirely, not from failure, but from fulfillment, as if they had spoken their last word. And in the former lands of Anidus's mandate, 3 former correctors stood motionless beside a statue of the old gods. They could not remember why they had come. One turned away, another knelt. In palace, the host emerged slowly from the waterline. They no longer walked in lines. Some leaned on one another. Some carried the lanterns of the fallen, a few saying, broken, slow, but real. They remembered, not fully, but truly, the shape of what was lost, the rhythm of the spiral. Palicus walked at their center. His eyes were closed, yet he didn't stumble. Mist curled behind his steps and formed faint spirals that held their shape long after he passed. The swamp didn't resist his wrist, his exit. It sighed. No one spoke. The silence was no longer empty. It listened. The swamp behind them no longer whispered. It waited in the sky above the hollow marching. In the sky above the mountains, a cloud dissolved and revealed a single spiral star pulsing faintly, then flaring, then vanishing. In a field far from the war, a man dreaming of a lost sister suddenly awoke. He wept and could not say why, but he remembered her name. The spiral had deepened, but it had also cracked. Priimydica felt it. 2 gods were gone. The pattern no longer looped clean. It snagged, it jittered, it strained against itself. He looked to the west. The next guardian would step into a realm not just guarded by a god, but frayed by their absence. The war, no longer hidden, no longer just incarnate, had become remembrance itself. End of chapter 3. Chapter 4. The Sky That Devours Meaning of Book 2, The Firewalker's Oath. The flame without center. This flame, the third flame, did not rise, it turned. Around itself, within itself, a spiral of motion, not light. It cast no shadow, it gave no heat. Where the others had burned upward or mourned downward, this flame spun in place, a void that hummed. Its hum was not heard, but felt like breath caught in the throat, like a wind circling a thought not yet spoken. Priimydica stood before it, unmoving. He did not speak the name of the realm. There was no name to speak, only breath, only motion, only wind not yet born. Across the spiral lands the wind shifted, banners twisted, dust rose, songs stopped mid-note. In one temple an acolyte gasped and found his prayer reversed. Leaves turned to face roots. A bell rang in reverse and broke itself upon silence. The host of the third guardian did not gather. They were already moving. Some marched east. Others wandered west. Some walked backward, their eyes closed. A few floated in memory, drawn not by call, but by suggestion. When they passed one another, they did not nod. They whispered things that had not yet been said. Some walked in silence and wept without reason. Others laughed with their voices not their own. No one agreed on the starting point. No one knew who they followed, but they converged. Some were high, some were cold, somewhere the trees bent in directions that didn't match the wind. There they stood, waiting, not for a leader, but for silence. The guardian stepped forward. Or perhaps he was already there. His cloak was thin, his eyes were pale. He held no weapon, no name. He did not speak. Instead, the wind around him curled into a spiral. The mist that trailed behind his steps didn't settle. It hovered. The grass beneath his feet bent sideways and forward, then spiraled in place, unsure what direction meant. Birds in the sky scattered without flight. A cloud pulled itself into a line, then split. Far below, a hill folded inward like a page unturned. Where his foot fell, the world forgot stillness. Priimydica watched through the flame. He did not place a stone. He did not kneel. He only exhaled. The spiral spun wider. There was no song, only breath. Only the waiting air. The breath speaks. A roll did not announce itself. It whispered. A current without edge, a breeze without source. The host felt it before they heard it. When they heard it, it was never the same voice twice. Some heard songs in languages they had not learned. Others heard their own names spoken by mouths that had never called them. One soldier fell to his knees, shaking because the wind spoke with the voice of his dead brother. Another laughed, then wept, as a lullaby from a home that had never existed drift past. The air didn't move in lines. It curled, halted, doubled back. Breath itself became uncertain. Some in the host began to cough, not from sickness, but from echo. They tried to inhale and found their lungs repeating what had not yet been exhaled. One fell unconscious and awoke whispering lines from a poem no one had written. Voices overlapped, statements repeated, questions broke mid-syllable and returned with new meaning. No one dared to speak aloud, not because they were afraid, but because the air might speak back and steal their intention. The host began to falter. Some broke into small clusters, clinging to each other for a kind of stability. Others wandered off, repeating the fragments of things they did not believe. A woman held up her hand and said, "Stop," but her voice reversed mid-word and she vanished into mist. The guardian moved through them, not beside, through. Where he walked, the wind bent differently. It did not obey, but it hesitated. He left no trail, but all knew where he had passed. The air clung colder, more still. He did not look at the host. He did not need to. He heard them already, not their voices, but versions of them carried in the breeze, potential selves, discarded selves, selves that had broken long before. He walked on, up a slope that sloped in more than one direction, between rocks that murmured in spirals, across a plain where breath circled in small eddies, trying to become meaning. At the crest of the hill, he stopped. A gust rose suddenly. Circular, narrow, specific. It wrapped around him. Once it spoke his name, but not the one he had refused. He closed his eyes. The wind moved on. The wind did not begin. It simply was. No one marked the entrance. No map declared its shape. The guardian crossed into it between two standing stones that did not agree on distance. Behind him, the host scattered, or vanished entirely. The sky overhead shifted. Clouds unraveled, then reversed. Shadows pointed in multiple directions. The ground hummed softly. Not a sound, but the idea of one. The plane stretched and folded, then breathed. He walked. Steps fell in sequence, but the trail behind him curled inward, as though time refused to remain drawn. A bird flew overhead 3 times, each time younger. Grass blades bent forward, then snapped backward, then bent again. In this wind knot, identity was not erased, it was replicated. He saw himself, not in mirror, not in dream, walking toward him, then away, then around. One wore a crown of teeth, another wept into an empty scroll, a third carried a broken spear crusted with red frost, as a fourth simply knelt, face to the sky, whispered nothing. None acknowledged him. They passed through, they passed around, one reached out, not to touch but to measure, as if confirming something he had almost become. Another stared through him as though reading the shape of his breath. He continued. Each step made the wind pause, then resume, then question. He passed a field where soldiers stood in loops, fighting, losing, cheering, dying, then resetting. One woman turned toward him with 7 mouths and asked, "Is this where I chose?" Another version of her watched silently from behind her own eyes. She didn't answer. There was no answer. The spiral hung above them, distended, its curve imperfect, its lines beginning to fray. Birds flew through it and did not emerge. Light touched it and recoiled. He passed a grove of stone trees with roots in the air. Each stone bore an echo not of sound but of intent. One pulsed with guilt, another with triumph, and a third with something like surrender. He touched one and felt nothing, but a piece of wind clung to his fingertip, and then he stopped. The wind spoke again, but this time it did not echo him. It asked what he would not be. And somewhere within the wind knot, Aaron watched. Not his shape, not his voice, but as the question that would not resolve. He did not descend. There was no sky to part, no light to break, no voice to herald. The god did not arrive. It folded inward. A pressure without shape, a presence that doubled rather than declared. Air thickened, breath reversed, meaning buckled. Where the spiral once curved, it now looped. Where time once spiraled outward, it now curled back into itself. The guardian stood alone. Before him, not a figure, not a shadow, but the shape of possibility unchosen. A knot of wind in a windless place. A silence that answered questions before they were asked. Then came the speech, not from mouth, not from wind, from in between. You arrive when you depart. The voice fractured, spoke from multiple angles. The words passed through him sideways, stuttering, not in sound but in meaning. To name is to erase. You do not walk, you remember walking. Every step forward is a recursion, every silence a scream. The guardian staggered, not from impact, from distortion. His thoughts reversed mid-formation. One foot lifted before the other decided to follow. He tried to breathe and found the exhale entering first. His pulse miscounted. His fingers tingled with directionless memory. The god didn't move. It didn't need to. It encoiled language itself. A spiral of broken syntax encircled the guardian. Verbs collapsed into nouns. Time tensed. Identity thinned. Even his shadow began to disobey him, bending in directions the light had not allowed. He tried to speak and was answered before sound emerged. You are not here. You are the memory of standing. You have never began. The host, if they remained, couldn't reach him. They were either still or already gone or had never come. He reached for his center. There was no center, only breath, only wind, only the spiral, frayed. The god pressed closer, not as mass, but as implosion, as the contradiction that folds meaning into echo. Trees nearby twisted in on themselves, stone cracked and reassembled with syllables carved into their grain, syllables that erased as they were read. The spiral above stretched, pulled, taut, lines fraying at the edges, then curling in contradiction. He dropped to one knee, but he did not fall apart. He breathed once, and in that breath something held. Not identity, not memory, but refusal. The god struck, not with fist, not with form, but with absence, with silence pulled tight like wire. Air was born from the guardian's lungs. He gasped and nothing came. His chest hollowed, his mouth open, but breath betrayed him. He collapsed to his knees. Then lightning. Once it burned the spiral into the sky. The light seared across the heavens, bending in on itself, its tail chasing its origin. Twice it cracked through the name he had hidden in his marrow. The force drove it outward, then away. The ground beneath him seethed, not with fire, but with freezing breath. Wind thickened, ice laced his feet. Frost climbed his spine like memory, hardening into regret. The god condensed, not into body, but into shape, not into form, but into weight. A knot of air, too dense to pass, too old to forget. Within it, contradiction pulsed, logic unraveling, certainty collapsing into rhythm without time. The guardian tried to rise. His legs were locked. Ice gripped his ankles like promises never spoken. The cold clawed up his bones. His breath failed him again. The air rang with pressure. The god pressed closer. To resist is to become. To become is to repeat. To repeat is to vanish. The words wrapped around him like chains of vapor. The guardian couldn't answer. His voice was sealed. His mind staggered, and yet he reached, not for language, for breath, for spiral, for stillness. In the recursion, his ribs cracked, his spine bowed, his knees screamed. He stood. The ice split with a scream of its own. The wind recoiled, the air flinched. The god did not retreat. It anchored, coalesced, condensed. The guardian faced it and stepped forward and wrestled him. There were no rules, no arms, no names, just force, resistance, fracture. Wind surged and snarled. Thought bent, meaning buckled, and hands found shoulders made of tempest. Bodies spun into mist, tore apart and reformed again. Their struggle carved arcs into the earth. Silent spirals of broken intent. They fought for stillness, for direction, for presence. The spiral above closed tighter, its line steady. The guardian opened his mouth and spoke. Not a name, a word, one word. It did not echo, it ended. The wind stopped. The spiral froze. The god unraveled, not shattered, but undone. And silence, real silence remained. not the silence of absence, the silence of conclusion. Far below, across the spiral lands, the wind slowed. It didn't stop, it softened. The trees stood straighter, rivers resumed their curves. 1,000 birds turned inward at once, as if remembering flight was not just motion, but meaning. Banners ceased their fluttering and hung in reverent stillness. In the towers of the hollow order, scribes paused mid-sigil. Some quills floated upward. One parchment unraveled in reverse, its glyphs de-threading into blankness before writing themselves again. An acolyte gasped and found his voice speaking in spirals, not in sound, but in breath. In the western passes, a child spoke a sentence backward and forward at once in the valley where the bells tolled, sound saying twice, once in iron, once in dream. A bell shattered into frost, and yet its echo lingered warm. The spiral held, but not without bruise. In Aerul, the host emerged slowly from the edges of the wind knot. Some walked as if newly born, blinking at the sky like it had changed. Others wept into nothing, unable to say why. One clutched a branch that had not existed. Another whispered a name she had not learned, and no one corrected her. One man knelt and wept, then laughed, then forgot both. A woman held her hand to her ear, and she heard the sea. Though they were nowhere near water, the guardian stood at the center, not triumphant, not whole, but present. Where Aaron had fallen, nothing remained, not ash, not echo, only stillness, not passive, intentional, a silence that remembered what had tried to unmake it. The spiral marked the air, not visibly, but in how the space held itself together. The wind encircled the guardian once and called him air. No ceremony, no crown, just a word placed in the air, as if spoken by the spiral itself. Air did not nod, did not bow. He breathed, and the breath stayed. Priimydica, in the temple of the stone tree, felt the shift. The third flame vanished, not quenched, not failed, fulfilled. The altar cracked beneath it, revealing a fifth stone below. He whispered the name, then closed his eyes, for the spiral had held, but only just. End of chapter 4. Chapter 5, The Throne of Stone, in Book 2, The Firewalker's Oath. The fourth flame didn't spiral, it pressed, a low, wide burn, no flicker, no dance. It didn't reach upward like hunger, nor inward like breath. It flattened against the stone of the altar like an old wound refusing to close. Heated without fire, light without motion, even the air around it seemed to harden, as if afraid to breathe. Priimydica stood before it. He didn't place the stone, he didn't bow. Instead, he stepped back. As if not wanting the flame to remember his name, from the spiral lands, the host arrived, not in song, not in grief, not in the shiver of unseen wind. They came in lines, 4 across, heads low, armor blackened with ash. No banners flew, no voices carried. They marched as if already beneath the earth. Their bows were not visible, but their hands trembled with callous memory. Each carried a quiver slung low, half concealed beneath oil-draped cloaks. The arrows within were barbed, loops strange, forged not to pierce but to hold, to bind. And though none spoke it aloud, all knew the pattern. 4 volleys, 4 limbs, no misses, no mercy. The fourth guardian stepped from the crowd, not emerging but resolving as if he had always been there, simply waiting for stillness to reveal him. He wore no crest, no sigil. His eyes were neither sharp nor dull, only watchful. His breath came in metered cadence. His cloak was slate, not ceremonial. He carried no shield, only a short, curved blade strapped to his back, its hilt wrapped in stone thread. The host parted without signal. He did not look back. He walked to the flame, and the flame compressed further, pulling tight into a disk, the color of slow-burning coal. No spiral form, no echo stirred. Then he spoke, not loudly, not reverently, just enough. I will go. No one asked where, no one asked why. Priimydica watched him pass beneath the arch of the stone tree. He didn't call his name, perhaps he did not know it. Behind him, those split into quarters, one to each cardinal direction, as prearranged in silence. They moved like trained breath, barely disturbing the ground. When they reached the hollowed basin where stone met root and sky, they disappeared from sight. The guardian did not pause, he did not instruct. He descended alone into the godland, the place where earth no longer yielded but listened. Above, the fourth flame dimmed slightly but did not vanish. It waited, not for glory, not for justice, only for the thing that would follow, measured, silent, precise. There were no temples in the deep basins of Orphide, only stone, miles of it, folded, layered, veined with minerals no one named. The wind did not pass here. The sun arrived dim and late, scattering itself against cliffs, too slow to fall. Even moss seemed careful, growing only where the stone permitted. The guardian stood alone in the hollow, no host behind him, no echo of arrival. He placed no banner, he lit no fire. He stood at the center of an eroded platform, carved with concentric rings, once used for judgment or offering or something older. He looked upward. "Orson," he said. The name struck the cliffs like a stone tossed into a still pond. Nothing answered. Then the sound of weight, not movement, pressure. The platform trembled once, then steadied. A line in the cliff above split. Stone peeled back from stone, and from it rose the god. Orson did not arrive in motion, he emerged in presence, taller than towers, thicker than thought. His shoulders bore the marks of tectonic age. His face was a slope, his eyes like pits where light forgot to gather. He did not glow, he did not speak, he simply watched. The guardian did not kneel, he did not lift his blade. He bowed his head, once, precise, respectful. "I asked for single combat," he said. The cliffs didn't laugh, but they seemed to lean slightly. "No war, no fire, no sacrifice, no death but our own." He raised his hand, "to spare the lives of the host." Orson blinked, slowly, as if processing the request, not through language but through gravity. The guardian waited. No breath held, no tension worn. He stood with hands at his sides, cloak unmoving. The wind passed him and did not return. At last, Orson moved. Foot the size of a hill settled into the hollow with no rush, no thunder, only density. Another followed. Stone bowed beneath them, not cracking, but enduring. His voice, when it came, did not come from his mouth, but from the foundation beneath both of them. "You speak of mercy." The guardian met his gaze. I speak of conclusion." A pause, then another step forward. "You carry no crown." "I need none." "You bring no witness." "I require none." "Then you are sincere," said the god. Not a question, an observation. The guardian gave no reply. Orson stepped fully into the ring. He raised no weapon, he formed none. His hands alone were artifacts of destruction, hands that had shaped valleys, stilled rivers, cradled mountains in sleep. "This combat," the god said, "is between builders." The guardian nodded once. "It is." Orson lowered his massive frame to match the hollow's edge. Each step compacted centuries of soil beneath. He looked to the sky, not to draw power, but to acknowledge distance. Then he entered the center of the ring. Somewhere far beyond the cliffs, 4 divisions of the host adjusted their positions. In ravines and shadowed crags, they unslung their bows. Not one string creaked, not one arrow shifted. The signal had not yet been given, but the air knew, the ground knew. This would not be a duel, it would be a severance. The host did not vanish, it hid. 4 divisions, north, south, east, west, sank into the terrain like memory pressed into stone, not buried, not cloaked, simply positioned where shadow and slope could fold them into the world unnoticed. They said nothing. Their bows were unwrapped in silence, strung not with sinew, but with a song thread, fibered from woven resonance, taut with harmonic charge. To draw one was to summon breath from stone. To fire one was to embed intent into trajectory. The arrows had no tips. They curved at the end, barbed not to cut but to catch, each forged in Orphide's deepest forged vaults. cooled in oath water, etched with chains of binding. They did not kill, they held hooks for a god. Chains had been woven too. Each coil carried its own name, burned into the metal, not by flame, but by sacrifice. These were not links for mortals. They had been tempered against density, tested in trial craters, designed to hold a being made of geological will. Each archer had trained blindfolded. Each had fired into thunder, into wind, into echo. Each had memorized the coordinates of the basin. Each had known the moment would come. And each had been told, you will not see the duel, you will see the signal. One step back, one hand to the hilt, one heartbeat, then fire. They watched now. From cliffs and crevices, from sinkholes carved by time, from the roots of Orphide's forgotten giants, some lay prone, others knelt in sequence. Each had one arrow notched, each held tension without breath. The guardian did not look toward them. He didn't need to. This was not betrayal, this was design. In the center of the basin, Orson shifted his stance. The stone beneath him flexed, not in pain but in recognition. His mask condensed, his fist curled slowly as if remembering how to strike without crushing the world beneath. The duel had not yet begun, but the host was ready. No warrior among them believed this would be easy, but all believed it would be done. They didn't pray, they did not prepare a second volley. There would not be one. Hooks would find flesh, chains would drag, and the moment of tension, the one breath where the god's limbs failed to align, would belong to the guardian alone. He had promised no glory, only precision. Far above, the wind did not move, the sun did not pierce the hollow. And in the breath, before rupture, 400 arrows listened for a single moment. A step back, a lift to a hand to the hilt, a pause, then fire. The god moved first, not in haste, not in fury, but with the patience of sediment. One step, another, his fist flexed like hills, preparing to fall. The ground moaned beneath him. The cliffs withdrew, not from fear, but to make room. The guardian drew no blade. He stepped to meet him, cloaked still, head level. His feet touched the earth with no more weight than a promise. He did not circle, he did not bow. He simply stood just beyond reach and looked up. Orson raised one arm. A strike, if it landed, would flatten a fortress. Then he paused, a blink, a breath, and in that breath, the guardian stepped back, a single pace, left foot behind right. One hand slid to the hilt. Far above, in the cliffs and crevices, 400 arrows answered. The sound was not a roar, it was a sigh made of intent. Hooks flew, each sang through the air with a song thread's resonance, shimmering briefly, then embedding. One struck the left wrist, another found the right shoulder, two more caught behind the god's knees, a fifth hooked the small of his back where no armor had ever been needed. Each chain pulled taut, not from mortal strength, but from anchors buried beneath the stone. Orson staggered, not from pain, from violation. His arm jerked sideways, his weight faltered, the blow he had readied collapsed inward, dust flared as his knee touched the ground. He bellowed, not a war cry, but a tectonic scream, the voice of a continent discovering betrayal. The cliff shook, one cracked, a pillar snapped in two. The guardian didn't flinch. He stepped forward, not in a rush, but in rhythm. His cloak fluttered once as he closed the distance. The blade at his back slid free, curved and silent, catching no light. Orson strained. One arm tore free of a hook. The chain screamed but held. Another arrow slipped from his calf, stone dust and blood mixing at the edge of the ring. The guardian didn't hurry. He moved like memory sharpened into motion. Orson turned, half-risen, stone, skin fracturing at the joints, and opened his mouth to curse, to plead, to say something no one would ever hear. The blade passed through his neck in a single crescent arc. No shout, no call, no invocation, only a line drawn through silence. The god's head fell without crash, not like a boulder, but like a seal being broken. The body followed slowly, knees collapsing, limbs still bound. The chain snapped, not from strain, but because they no longer had anything to hold. The earth groaned once more, then stopped and in the hush that followed, the spiral itself hesitated. The dust didn't settle. It folded, layered itself, as if returning to something ancient, something inert. No echo followed the fall, no cheer, no gas. The god's body laid where it had collapsed, limbs sprawled, blood sinking into stone, too old to stain. The guardian stood over it. He didn't speak. He didn't look to the cliffs. He didn't check the chains. He simply waited, blade still in hand, until the breath left the world and did not return. And slowly he knelt. He pressed his palm to the base of Orson's skull, not to bless, not to honor, but to draw. The essence did not resist. It lifted in threads of heatless vapor, pale and dense, curling up from the broken form like memory untethered from weight. It spiraled once, then entered him. He did not shudder. He absorbed. Stone creaked beneath his feet, but not from pressure, from recognition. Orson's shape had not merely fallen, it had transferred. The density, the patience, the presence of the god seeped into the man who knelt beside him. Not a fusion, not an apotheosis, a severing, quiet, clean. The guardian rose. His blade returned to his sheath without sound. The cloak at his shoulders no longer stirred. His outline felt heavier, not physically, but gravitationally. The hollow bent inward towards him, just slightly, as if the land remembered whose blood had shaped it. Above, the cliffs remained still. The host emerged, not rushing, not shouting. Each quartered force moved in ritual pattern, bows slung, chains gathered. None asked what had happened. None approached the god's corpse. They did not look for affirmation. They had seen the stab. They had seen the signal. They had seen the severance. Now they returned. 4 lines forming, no parade. No song rose. No name was called. The body of Orson did not dissolve. It did not burn. It would not be buried. It would remain a monument, not of victory, but of subtraction. The guardian did not weep. He did not command. He walked, not toward a throne, not toward the host, but toward the edge of the basin. There, beneath a cliff face older than memory, he stopped, removed a single tool from his belt, not a weapon, but a chisel. He pressed it into the stone once, lightly, and began to curve. He did not write a name. He drew a line, then another, and another. A foundation, a structure, the first glyph of what would not be a temple, but something made to last. Behind him, the host did not follow. They watched, and the spiral, still bruised, still trembling, didn't echo. It only held. Far from the basin, beneath the temple of the stone tree, the fourth flame dimmed. It didn't vanish, it didn't flare. It narrowed, pressed tighter against the altar until it was no more than a low burning disk, thin as a memory, dense as a vow. Priimydica didn't speak. He watched it compress and knew the work was done. The god of stone had fallen. The spiral had not broken, but it had not rejoiced either. The host did not sing. They remained at the edge of the basin, not bowed, not still, but held. Some gathered the fallen arrows. Others folded the unused chains with care. No one spoke. They had seen death, but not a victory. The guardian carved. He had made no symbol of ascent. He built no altar. The stone he shaped was broad, leveled, measured, foundation, not monument. Hours passed. The wind returned, but did not lift the dust where the god had died. At dusk he stood. He turned toward the host. He said nothing, then began walking, not away, but onward. The host followed, 4 lines, no procession, no cadence, just motion. Behind them, the stone still held of what had been cut from it. The stone still held what had been cut from it. In the temple, Priimydica touched the altar. The flame no longer responded. It was fulfilled, but not named. He moved to place the 4th stone. He stopped. There was no name to whisper. The spiral had not yielded it. The guardian had not claimed it. The flame had sealed its vow, but not its title. The god had fallen, but no crown rose. Priimydica lowered his head. He looked beyond the altar, toward the far roots of the tree where no torch reached. There he whispered a single phrase, let him be called the Nameless One. Not in contempt, not in secrecy, but in recognition. A man who had drawn no praise, who had asked no witness, who had taken power without demand, had begun without banner to build. Outside, across the spiral lands, the wind slowed but did not stop. A stone tower leaned slightly inward and did not fall. In a village where no children played, one child drew a square in the dirt, not a spiral. A laborer in the east placed a brick and felt the weight of something finished, not begun. The spiral didn't sing, but it endured. The host returned to their work, not to war, but to construction. Some began to shape stones, others cleared paths. One carried a chain, not to bind, but to measure. The nameless one did not lead them. He walked a little ahead. No crown, no flame, no name, only the one they gave him when nothing else would form. And in the hollow where God had once stood, the heir did not remember the name he lost, because it had never been given. End of chapter 5. Chapter 6, in Annis, the realm with no edges. In Book 2, the Firewalker's Oath. At dawn, the temple of the stone tree didn't stir. No wind moved along among the roots. No birds nested in its high hollows. The air had not stopped. It had never arrived. Priimydica stood at the altar. 5 places had been carved, each for a flame. 4 had burned, each in its own time. 1 in judgment, 1 in grief, 1 in contradiction, 1 in severance. Each had named a guardian, and each had bent the spiral. Now, only the 5th remained. But no flame rose. The space did not resist. It did not echo. It did not mourn. It merely remained as if the fire had once tried to form there, failed, and forgotten its failure. Priimydica did not speak. He placed no stone. He offered no breath. He simply waited far below the temple, where the roots of the tree stretched into the earth's long memory. The spiral stilled, not like silence, more like a room abandoned so long ago that even echo had given up. And in that stillness something moved forward, not toward the altar, but away from it. He did not pass under a flame. He did not receive a signal. There was no sound of fire catching, no coil of mist, no press of wind, only the press of foot on stone and the absence that trailed behind him. The host did not gather. Some say they had already departed. Others say none were summoned at all. Still, others claim they marched but left no shape behind. Priimydica did not follow. He watched the place where a flame should have burned. The bark of the tree did not glow. The altar did not hum. The fifth spiral carved into the stone did not pulse. It only waited, but not as the others had. His waiting was not hunger. It was not readiness. It was absence so total. It began to feel like negation. And still, the step had been taken. Somewhere far from the tree, a field cracked without pressure, a mirror held to the sky did not reflect. A woman woke with no memory of having slept. A candle lit in reverse, shrinking into itself until only ash remained. Even the ash dispersed. Priimydica turned his gaze to the unlit altar, and for the first time in all the trials he said nothing, not to the flame, not to the spiral, not even to himself. He lowered his eyes and let the void walk unobserved. There was no gate, no threshold, no arch, no veil of mist. The guardian stepped forward, and the world behind him forgot he had stood there. The spiral offered no marker. One moment, there was stone. The next, not absence, but the refusal of definition. No sky, no ground, no walls, only gradients of tone, of memory, of breath, unmeasured. He walked, or he thought he walked. He did not fall, they resolved. His feet did not fall, they resolved. His arms did not sing, they ceased and resumed. Sound came in half notes, breaking before the echo. Once he heard his heartbeat, then could not remember what rhythm meant. He blinked, his eyes remained closed or open. He couldn't tell. The weight of his body thinned, his cloak no longer touched his back. He tried to flex a hand and found 5 fingers, or none, or one, becoming many. Time didn't pass, it dispersed. Somewhere to his left, light bent in reverse. Somewhere to his right, thought folded in on itself. Somewhere ahead, he hoped, was purpose. But even hope began to unravel. The spiral had guided the others through trial, contradiction, grief, structure. But here, it did not reach. And Annis did not oppose the pattern. It simply refused to participate. A ripple passed through the space, not seen but intuited. Like a wave of forgetting, he felt the memory of his name loosen. The shape of his breath split, then looped backward. He kept moving. He could not remember why, but he knew what would happen if he stopped ahead or below or within. A shape began to unform. Not a gate, not a figure, not a god. Something like the idea of proximity, a thinning of the unreal. He didn't know if he approached it or if it was approaching his unmaking. He reached forward. His hand did not extend. The act of reaching broke mid-thought. Still, he moved, not with will, but with refusal. Not even the void could stop the thing that had already let go of everything else. Then the sound came, a tone with no pitch, a silence forced into shape. It scraped along the rim of his hearing, and he tasted metal in his mouth. His stomach turned inside out and then returned. The shape before him shuddered. He could feel it now, not his presence, but his edit. Whatever it was, the world ceased to be. He had found the edge, or rather the place where edge itself was not allowed. He stood before it and waited for it to erase him. It didn't speak. The thing in the void, the unshaped shape of a thing, the edit behind breath made no sound, but its presence featured fractured space. The act of standing near it undid memory. The guardian felt the bones in his arms forget they were meant to hold weight. Then came the blindness, not darkness, not shadow, not the dimming of light, but the removal of seeing, the subtraction of the concept itself. One blink, and sight stopped being a verb. There were no shapes, no depths, no movement. The world was not black, it was unsensed. The guardian reached for orientation and felt nothing but proximity to unknowing. Then came the second thing. A footfall, then another, measured, identical. He turned slowly, but his turning had no meaning. The sound circled him just outside of definition. Then breath, not his, a whisper, ragged, shallow, like lungs that had never been fully drawn. Then another step. The guardian braced. He raised his arms, not toward sound, but against vanishing. Something moved in front of him. No weight, no smell, but intent. He swung, missed, stepped back, listened again. It struck him, not hard, but perfectly. A mirrored blow, not guesswork, not a god's hammer, a reflection. Then again, to the ribs, to the side, to the shoulder. He staggered, recovered, swung again. His fist meant nothing, or worse, itself. His enemy was him, but not exactly. It was a shadow made by nothing, delayed, wrong-footed, somehow off. He could not see it. He could only feel the mistake of it. A version of himself trained on every move he knew, but distorted in delay, in malice, in mockery. He dropped to one knee, not in pain, in calibration. The spiral had no reach here, so he stopped trying to remember it. He listened. Step, step, breath, breath. He turned to the stagger, to the almost. The thing circled him again. He let it pass. He exhaled once. Sharp, slow. When the step came, he turned with no telegraph, no rage, no thought. He simply moved. His hand met throat. The shape flinched. It tried to mimic but failed. This motion had never been taught. It had only been lived. He tightened his grip, and for the first time in that realm, something real resisted. A face not seen but guessed hovered in front of his own. It said nothing, but its silence cracked at the edges. He raised his fist and swung. The first blow landed, then another, then another. He could not see where he struck, only that his knuckles met something that flinched, then tried to reshape itself, then faltered again. No scream, no voice, just fracture. The god did not fall with drama. It folded as if the void itself were trying to retract what it had accidentally allowed to form, but the guardian held on. One hand on what he thought was a neck, one arm locked around a limb that never resolved. They twisted, not in battle, in collapse. The world beneath them gave away. There was no crack, no rupture, no shatter of ground, only the sensation of down, as if they had stumbled into a depth not meant to exist, a hole inside the void, hidden even from nothing. They fell, not quickly, not slowly, not through space. They fell through erasure. Sound unraveled, thought inverted, motion lost all axis, but the guardian still held on. He did not cry out, he did not demand, he did not reason. He struck, each blow a gesture without grammar but true. He did not need a name, he did not need a realm, he needed the god to stop. The shape beneath him shuddered again. It changed, but slower now. Its edge collapsed in on itself, its resistance thinned, and for the first time since he had entered Inanus, the guardian felt gravity, not of body, but of certainty. One more strike. Another. Then stillness, not peace, not silence. Stillness, like something final. He did not rise at once. He remained kneeling over the thing that had tried to make him. Whatever lay beneath him now no longer fought, no longer lifted, no longer shifted, no longer erased. It simply wasn't, and this time was not by choice. He exhaled. His breath returned to him. A second later, light. Dim, gray, impossible, but light. There was no bottom, no floor, just a presence where fall had ended. And in that moment, with blood on his hands, no memory of sight, and the god dissolving below, he whispered a single word. Not loud, not proud, not declared, just spoken because something had to be. Anasius. The name did not echo. This was the guardian's name, and it held. The light did not grow, it merely remained, a thin pulse in the void, enough to trace the shape of his breath, the line of his hands, enough to remember gravity. He stood, not triumphant, not reborn, just present. Wherever Ananias had fallen, whatever had truly been slain, left no remains, no body, no bones, not even silence, only this, a place where absence had failed. And in that failure, he breathed. His cloak clung again to his shoulders. The floor beneath him no longer shifted. His shadow returned, faint, twitching, but whole. The spiral did not return, but it hummed. Not as music, not as memory, as permission. He looked upward. There was no sky, but there was motion, a pull, an incline, a place, a path, where none had been before. He walked, each step anchored not by faith nor by command, but by the thing he had named Anasius. Not a title, not an inheritance, a declaration. The spiral had twisted, the pattern had held, but he had endured, and in enduring he refused to vanish. He climbed. Stone returned gradually, first underfoot, then at his sides, then above, as the voice peeled back into passage. The realm did not collapse, it released him, not in defeat, but in acknowledgement. Outside, across the spiraling lands, strange things stirred. A scribe woke and wept. At a blank page she had not written. A blind child looked toward the sun and whispered he made it out. A tree that had never grown leaves dropped one black, weightless, real. At the temple of the stone tree, Priimydica raised his hand. There was no flame, not yet. But the altar shivered. The fifth stone pulsed once. Not in light, but in containment, as if the flame had already begun to burn in a place too deep for surface to reflect. And then footsteps. Then they did not echo, they did not announce, they simply arrived, one after another, across the stone paths beneath the altar, not from above, not from below, but from the impossible in-between. And with them came a presence, not vast, not divine, but unremoved. He stepped forward, cloak torn, hands stained, face quiet. The host did not kneel, they gathered. No herald spoke. No crown was offered, but all who looked at him knew this was not the man who had entered. This was Anasius, and the spiral at last began to hold again. The flame did not appear, it clarified. One moment the altar was stone, the next, not heat, not light, but a density, a presence so absolute it warped space. Not brightness, not glow, just a subtle refusal of vacancy. Priimydica stepped forward. He did not place the stone, it was already there. He did not speak the name, it had already been spoken, far below, beneath the spiral's reach, where the void had choked every echo except one, Anasius. The name rang nowhere, but it held the altar in place. The fifth flame didn't flicker, it did not waver in wind, there was no wind, it hovered an inch above this stone, colorless, edgeless, slow. It burned with no smoke. It burned with no shadow. It burned like memory refusing to leave. The host stood in silence, not because they feared it, not because they honored it, but because it silenced them, not with threat, but with weight, with gravity. A child in the city stopped crying. A man digging a well struck stone and wept. A widow forgot her mourning just for a breath and remembered breath itself. Across Priimydica, mirrors darkened, bells cracked without sounding, language faltered mid-sentence, then resumed, gentler. Something had shifted, not forward, not backward, just held. Anasius stood before the flame. He did not reach toward it. He did not kneel. He simply breathed, and the flame did not react. It mirrored him, a stillness that remembered movement, a fire that remembered unbeing, and a spiral, now whole but bruised, curved around them both, not fully repaired, not fully clean, but no longer fraying. Priimydica placed a hand upon the altar. The flame pressed back. For the first time in all 5 awakenings, he felt resistance, not hostility, not pain, but presence. A will that did not rise, but endure. He stepped back, said only one word, enough. No one echoed it. They didn't need to. The fifth guardian had returned, the spiral had steadied, and the pattern once more knew its shape. End of chapter 6. Chapter 7. The realms fracture and the oath is paid. In Book 2, the Firewalker's Oath. The colorless flame did not flicker. It held, low, dense, unshifting, above the stone, as if it had always been there. No heat, no smoke, no echo of kindling, only a hovering presence the size of a closed hand, casting no shadow and allowing none near. Priimydica stood before it. He had waited for this moment. Through 4 trials, through 5 silences, through a generation's worth of warnings folded into scripture and forgotten. Now the fifth flame had arrived, and still he did not breathe. The spiral coiled in full circumference now, hummed in the space behind his eyes, not loud, not vibrant, but intact, complete. He stepped forward. From his robe he withdrew the 5th stone, not inscribed, not sealed, but blank, as if awaiting nothing. He set it at the final point of the altar where the last spiral met the center. The flame did not flare, the altar did not glow, but something looped, not outward, not upward, but inward. The spiral had completed its shape. The pattern remained silent. That was expected. It had never spoken to Priimydians in sound, but the spiral usually did. It waited. He waited. Stillness, breath, silence. Then something turned. Not in wind, not in the room, but in the thread that bound land, flame, and vow. The spiral tightened, not collapsed, not ruptured, just contracted, as if it now knew it had gathered too much, as if 5 flames, each containing the memory of a fallen god, were too much for it to contain without change. Priimydica opened his mouth to speak, to offer thanks, to finish the rite. No words came. He looked to the host, or what remained of them. Some were still present, stationed in quiet lines beneath a tree. Others had not returned from the god realm. Some would never return. The 5th guardian stood apart. He did not look at the flame. He did not kneel. He did not leave. He only watched, not outward, but toward the place where the spiral twisted into itself. The flame held. So did the spiral. But Priimydica, who had spent his life learning what it meant for the spiral to speak, now felt something else. It was not speaking. It was bracing. The spiral didn't crack. It bent, not visibly, not to the eye or ear, but in the way a thought can forget its own edge. In the way breath can become irregular without the lungs failing. Across Priimydica, subtle misalignments began. A bell in the western cloisters rang and no one heard it until an hour later, when its echo passed through a child's dream. In the south, water refused to boil. In the east, a laborer struck a stone and watched it bleed. In the north, a singer began a liturgy and forgot the final verse, not from fear, but from blankness. The pattern didn't shudder, but the spiral, the thread that once turned the pattern toward Priimydian minds, curled in on itself. It had stretched too far. 5 flames, 5 guardians, 5 god deaths. The spiral was meant to guide, not to contain. Now it was asked to do both. Priimydica felt it in his chest. Not a collapse, but a convolution. The spiral still held, but it held too much. It was looping too tightly, trying to fold what could not be reconciled. In Orphide, birds flew in incomplete circles. In Pallas, sleepwalkers marched into the woods and would not return. In Isphide, a brazier lit with no spark and refused to be extinguished. The priests called it a surge. The scribes called it a breath. Priimydica knew it for what it was, a warning. The spiral could not break, not yet, but it could overturn. Turned so tightly it strangled in on itself. And as he looked toward the 5th flame, still hovering without motion, he saw it in its colorless heart, not peace, but pressure. One line of the host collapsed without cause. A sentinel dropped his staff and stared at his hand, as if it were no longer his. Another whispered, "It's slipping," and no one knew what he meant. The spiral had turned too far inward. It still moved, it still looped, but now it looped around a center that no longer held. No horn sounded, no herald rode through the lands, no priest carved a final glyph. The sundering did not begin with prophecy, only with silence. It began in Palace, though no one agreed on when. A marsh froze without warning, then boiled, then stilled. The trees retracted into themselves. A child bent to gather a water fruit, and never stood again, not from death, but because the ground had forgotten how to return her. Then Isfide, the fire kilns, went cold. Not extinguished, simply ceased, as if heat had remembered it was a myth. Armies stationed in the basalt corridor looked to the horizon and saw 6 suns, none of them correct. Air rule next. Winds looped inward, rivers lost direction, the sky turned opaque, then translucent. One village fell upward, another repeated the same day 3 times, then stopped altogether. The realms were tearing, not as land splits or mountains shear, but as thought unbinds from form, not unvanishing, but folding in, separating, unthreading from the one shape they had once shared. Orphide was last, the realm of stone and structure held the longest, but even it could not anchor the rest. When the echo arrived, that deep gut-born vibration with no sound, Priimydica dropped to one knee, not in pain, in recognition. He felt the spiral recoil, not in resistance, but in defense. It had not been designed for this. It was meant to guide a world, not to preserve it, not without gods. The unified Priimydican realm, forged from 5 divine dominions, had been held together by trial and vow, not by strength. The gods had bound it. Now the gods were gone, and the spiral, having fulfilled its arc, had nothing left to seal with. In the eastern basin, a bridge collapsed without breaking. In the city, a mirror refused to reflect. In a temple long abandoned, a torch lit itself, then burned into frost. The realms broke. No enemy breached their gates. No traitor spoke a forbidden name. No sin triggered divine wrath. They simply fell apart, because nothing was left to hold them together. They were forged in fire, air, grief, stone, and void. They bore trial, killed gods, returned, changed. They stood before the flames and received no crowns, no banners, only names, or none at all, and none of them were gods. And when the realms began to fall inward, the guardians did not. The guardians did what they had been made to do. They tried to endure. Irenaeus stood at the edge of Isfide and raised his sword, not in defiance, but in preservation. The land split behind him. He planted his blade in the rift and screamed. The sound held the ground for a breath. Then the stone swallowed both edge and scream. Palicus wandered the ruins of Pallas, arms wide as if to pull the trees back into their shapes. The vines curled through him, the air turned to pace, the marsh didn't answer. Air encircled in windless silence, wings half spread, mouth frozen between command and prayer. No storm obeyed, the sky retracted, time blinked and forgot its position. Inacius stood still. He did not struggle, he simply let the world unravel around him, as if he knew this part had already been written. In the Nameless One, he fought, not against a foe, not to save what could not be saved, but to remain exactly where he stood. He gripped stone, he pressed foot to foundation. He stared into the sky as it cracked. He refused. For a while it worked, and the sky screamed back, not in rage, but in disassembly, and the spiral buckled, not by punishment, by geometry. There was no room left for all 5. One by one, the guardians were turned from the root world, not banished, not chosen, just separated. Wherever they went, they didn't vanish, but they were no longer reachable, and the realms that once flowed through each other now curled around each guardian like coiled fates. None of them called for help, none of them broke the vow to not interfere with mortals, but the world no longer held space for their unity. They were not defeated, but they were no longer together. And the spiral, exhausted from bearing 5 burdens it was never meant to contain, began to quiet itself. The spiral had been made to guide, not to rule, not to judge, not to sustain. Its purpose was rhythm, not reign, and yet for a moment it had held the weight of 5 fallen gods. Now it began to shed that burden. Priimydica stood alone in the inner chamber of the stone tree. The walls did not whisper, the altar did not pulse. He touched the last of the 5 stones and felt no heat, only tension. Like a rope drawn too tight, then suddenly loose, the spiral was complete. The Firewalker's oath had been fulfilled. The gods had been overthrown. Each realm had returned a guardian the fifth flame had held. The memory of war would not fade. He asked for nothing more. And still the realm shattered. The vow he had drawn from the guardians to never interfere with the ordinary remained unbroken. They had kept their distance. Even now, as the world fractured, they did not reach down. They did not lead. They did not save. They endured as agreed. And yet, it was not enough, not because they failed, but because the world itself, in the absence of gods, had no way to stay whole. The spiral had no ligature for that kind of wound. Priimydica sank to one knee, not in despair, in recognition. This was not betrayal. This was not punishment. This was the limit of design. He had built his world on the assumption that vow and flame would suffice, that justice and memory could replace the force of divinity. He had not been wrong. Spiral was never meant to seal what only the gods had kept whole, and now that absence had consequences. He had been wrong. The spiral was never meant to seal what only the gods had kept whole, and now that absence had consequences. He looked to the sky. There were no stars, only a coiling, shifting dimness like a bruise pressed into the pattern. The oath was paid in full, and still the world was falling. He did not die when the gate sealed. There had been no sound, no signal. One moment, the sky had held Orphide's arc. The next it folded and the path was gone. He remained one of hundreds left in the realm, but the only one in that clearing. He did not call out. There was no one to hear. The realm was not hostile. It was simply unheld. It did not attack him. It simply forgot to keep him safe. The wind began to murmur things he had never learned. The trees leaned toward him, though they had no branches. The stone beneath his feet began to pulse. He did not understand. At first it was hunger, then sleep, then skin. He tried to write a message on his arm, a name, a unit, a memory, but the ink soaked through, and skin beneath it changed color, a dull sheen like bark, like oil. The stars above him flickered out of sequence. He stopped sleeping. He stopped measuring time. He began to feel the realm breathing through him, not around him. He was not sick. He was not cursed. He was changing. His thoughts bent in places, not broken, just bent. He no longer remembered his old commander's face, but he could name the types of moss by scent. One day he reached for his blade and it was gone. In its place, something else had grown, not weapon, not bone, but something he could use. He did not mourn it. He no longer mourned anything. The realm had not killed him. It simply claimed him, or he had claimed it. He did not know. He walked it, but no longer walked toward return. Return was not a shape that fit anymore. He was somewhere far away. Priimydica stirred in his sleep. He did not dream of this soldier's face as he mutated into something else, but he woke with a word he had never heard before pressed against the inside of his teeth, and it burned. The stone tree remained, the roots deep, bark unmoved, leaves still. Its silence was no longer sacred, only still. The altar stood. The 5 stones lay in their spiral. The colorless flame hovered above the 5th. None of it had broken. None of it had moved. Priimydica stepped into the hollow beneath the canopy. No one followed. There was no host left to command. Not here. He reached toward the spiral, not with hand, but with breath. For years it had answered, not with words, but with rhythm, with turn, with the felt curve of pattern made close. Now it was still, not absent, not severed, just closed. The spiral had not shattered, it had not fled, it had simply curled inward, away from the many. The world remained, the pattern endured, but the spiral, the part of the pattern meant for the Priimydians, the limb made to loop their voices into reality, no longer turned for them. They could not feel it now, not in song, not in prayer, not in sleep. Only Priimydica still heard it, dim, strained, a murmur beneath the skin, like wind in a long abandoned hall, and for now, that was enough. He knelt beside the altar. He did not cry. He did not curse. He breathed. And the spiral twitched twice. Twitched once, in echo. Then it was still. He looked to the sky. There were no stars, only movement, slow, soft, uncertain, like a wound learning how to seal. He whispered, "The war is not coming." He placed one hand on the altar. Felt no heat. It has only just begun. And the flame, the 5th, the colorless, pulsed once, not in agreement, not in mourning, only in memory. End of chapter 7 of book 2, The Firewalker's Oath. End of book 2, The Firewalker's Oath.